This is Straight No Chaser Talk Radio. We're just getting started. Straight No Chaser Talk Radio.
He's drinking that with no chaser.
Welcome to Straight No Chaser. So grab a glass and join your hosts, your girl and BZ, Thin Bad, and the Chief. Welcome to Straight No Chaser, where we never dilute the issues, we only serve the hard stuff. It's the Chief, and I'm here this afternoon, and I'm kind of here by myself for a few minutes, and Thin Bad will be joining us, and Ambeezy is on another assignment, but we are really excited to talk about another hot topic that's facing our community, and people all over the world, they look at the newspaper, they read, they tweet, they twat, they do whatever they do with their electronic gadgets, and they're constantly complaining about stuff. Why can't the police do this? Why can't the schools do that? Why don't they build this in my neighborhood? How come we don't have shopping in my neighborhood? Just on and on and on and on and on. And then after they finish complaining, some of them, then they find that person to blame. Well, it's my senator that didn't do it. It's my congressperson that didn't do it. It's my neighbor. He didn't take my voting card in for me. It's the trash man. He left the trash turned upside down. It's always someone else's fault. There's always someone responsible for my anguish. So tonight, we want to talk a little bit about, let's stop pointing fingers. And let's get involved in how we can keep our community safe, or we can improve our schools, or we can improve the neighborhood, or we can get better shopping. How do you get involved? What can I do besides point fingers at everyone else about the issue that I have? How do we do this? Well, tonight we have a very special guest that's going to help us discuss this topic. We have with us tonight Mr. Phil Lee, who is a very active community activist in the Kettering-Largo area in Maryland. And Mr. Lee has a very distinguished record of community activism and public service that is very impressive. And the one thing about Mr. Lee, whether you love him or you hate him, the one thing you know is that he's going to give it to you straight, and that he's also a person that believes in what can I do, what can we do to make it better before we have thrown up our hands and said, okay, Mr. Senator, Mr. Police Chief, Mr. School Superintendent, what are you going to do? So without any further ado, let's welcome Mr. Lee to our show. Welcome, Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Chief. How are you tonight?
Very good, sir. And we certainly are very glad to have you here this evening. And Mr. Lee, I know you heard the introduction that I gave, and we were talking about, people are always complaining about things. Some things, there's a legitimate beef, but other things, you just wonder, well, if you think it's so bad, why don't you do something about it? Why don't you get involved? So let's start talking about that right now, Mr. Lee, because you've been an activist for many years, and you've not only worked in your community, but you've worked in communities throughout the DMV area, or for those who are not from that area, that's known as District, Maryland, and Virginia area, helping people to get organized, to get their stuff together, if you will. And so I just want to start out with one question. Why is it that people tend to want to point fingers as opposed to just rolling up their sleeves and taking an issue on head on?
Okay. Well, let me try to answer the question. Again, thanks for having me on.
Sure.
Maybe a good way to start this conversation, I think first I want to say to all of your listeners, often when we hear someone talking to us, we try to figure out if this person really knows what they're talking about. Has this person ever felt some of the pain, the anguish that they have? Or are they just someone coming out of a classroom or a textbook? So I want to say to your readers, I grew up in Washington, D.C. I went to school in Washington, D.C. My professional life started there. I started out after school as a young narcotics officer. I know what it's like to have to police those that you grew up with. For those religious people, I want to say to you, I grew up in the church, baptized in the church, married in the church. I've had my children baptized in that same church. I say these things because I hope I'll be able to let people to know I come from the same place that you do. I do. The last time I was on your show, I left with this message that if Black lives matter, then we need to start acting like Black lives matter to us.
Wow, what do you mean by that?
Well, Chief, it's almost as if everybody wants our lives to matter, to be a priority, except us. Now, I know a lot of this can maybe be controversial if that's what people choose, but let me try to give you something, or your listeners something to think about.
Okay.
James Brown said it best. James Brown said that without an education, you might as well be dead. Now, we danced to it, we popped our fingers to it, but there was a lot of truth in that. If our lives are going to matter, then, Chief, we have to start at that point of education. We have to. We want to talk about everything that's being done to us, but we don't put the time, the energy, the effort into making sure that our young people and our grandmothers are educated. You know, we lost a great Congressman, Elijah Cummings, a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things he said was, the children are the future we'll never see. And so that should send a message to us. We have to work on that future. We have to. We have to take responsibility for the future of our children. We can't keep on letting it be about where we are in the moment. This is a problem. I say to people often, if you got trash on your street, stop pointing at it and talking about it and bend over and be about it. Pick it up.
Okay.
Because if your neighbors see you pick up that piece of trash, maybe that will help them get the message that if you can do it, they can do it too.
Okay.
These are the things that we don't want to do. You know, when I was on last, we talked about the unfortunate incident in Texas where the black woman was shot and killed by a police officer.
That's correct.
And everybody wanted to bring the house down because this officer shot this woman. The officer was wrong. He was as wrong could be.
That's right.
But we were wrong. The neighbor was wrong. And other neighbors were probably just as wrong. We don't want to talk to each other. We don't want to try to lean on each other.
Well,
this is what goes so wrong.
Well, that's a great point, Mr. Lee. And, you know, let's circle back for a minute because before we came on the air, you and I were having an interesting conversation, and since you went down the road of law enforcement, let's just start there because there are quite a few issues pressing communities across the country. But we'll start with law enforcement since that seems to be the most high profile. You know, I was listening to Ambezi, and she was on the air, and they were talking about the Popeyes chicken situation that happened, unfortunately, in Fort Washington, Maryland. And, you know, everyone was talking about, oh, my goodness, you know, a chicken sandwich and how could you do this? But like you said, I didn't hear anyone talking about enough. When is it going to get to the point where we just have made it so uncomfortable for folks in the community to do stupid stuff like that? You know, I didn't hear that.
Let me interrupt, Mike, because I'm
Sure.
going to tell you something, Chief. I've had that conversation with quite a few people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sincerely sorry that this young boy is dead.
Absolutely.
I am. And my heart goes out, and all of those things, my prayers and all of these things, all of that applies. But somebody tried to explain to me why nobody told him or taught him that when you see a line of people, you cannot just start getting in front of people.
Exactly. There you go.
You see, this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. And everybody wants, oh, he's dead. Everybody saw him dead. But why didn't those people in that line stop and say, wait a minute, you're not going to do this? Why didn't they say to the manager of the Popeyes, we're not going to serve any more chicken in here until he stops doing this? You see, this is the problem that we're having. Everybody will stand by and shake their head. We led this boy to believe that this was acceptable behavior. Now, understand this. They're going to catch the individual who did it. There's no doubt in my mind about it. Now we're going to have one we're going to bury because he didn't have the respect for his own people. And we got one who's going to prison for a long time because he was tired of people disrespecting him.
Yep.
But it all comes back to the same people. It all comes back to us. Let me give you an idea of my frustration as we watch this ball roll.
Okay.
I'm still trying to understand why a Popeyes who has a popular chicken sandwich, who knows people want this sandwich, why is it we only have one line? Why didn't people say to this manager, you need to open up more lines? Mm-hmm. But standing in line for that chicken sandwich, why was that okay with us?
Yep.
So when we look at taking control of our communities and pointing the fingers at ourselves, it's got to start from the first step. It is a 1,000-mile journey. You've got one person dead, one who's going to prison, because the Popeyes manager didn't have enough respect for their community to serve these people efficiently. It happens too often. Every time we lose one of our young people, I guess a month ago, we had the young boy who the police stopped him. There's something went on. We're still not clear of what it was, but he ended up with a broken neck and he's paralyzed. Isn't that a sad thing?
Yes.
Now the people are blaming the police. Why did they do this to him? And I got to tell you, knowing police protocol and general orders, they did something wrong, but that's not what bothers me. What bothers me is, why was this young boy driving around with dead tags, no driver's license, smoking weed, with a 6-year-old child in the back, and the child's mother sitting beside him?
Right.
Come on now. I mean, what are we going to do here?
There you go. Well, you know, I feel your frustration, Mr. Lee. And, you know, there are a lot of questions that you raised that immediately jump to mind. Number one is, why is that kind of behavior accepted? You know, where are we going to start saying when we look at these incidents, okay, this shouldn't have occurred on this end, but there is